Today's episode is brought to you by Powbox, the easiest way to make your practice email HIPAA compliant. It works with the Gmail or Outlook account you already use, and your clients never have to log into a portal to read your messages. Get $250 off an annual plan with promo code MODERN.
Being a therapist, I know the work doesn't end when the session does. Notes, billing, scheduling, insurance follow-ups, it can all eat into your nights. That's why Katie and I use Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Whithelm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Whithelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our profession, the things that go on in our field, clients we serve, how we interact with them. And this is an episode where I think if a lot of the ways that we work with queer clients, the ways that we talk about their relationships, a lot of times in our field, we throw shade at what we learned in grad school, but I want to say that if most of the knowledge that we have in working with these kinds of populations is based in 1995 research, then, the world has evolved. It's no longer the taboo space that it was 30 years ago, and a lot of new research has come out as this becomes a part of our population that we recognize we need to show up. We need to not treat people like they're outsiders. So we are very thankful to have our guest, Tom Bruett, a licensed marriage and family therapist, come on and talk about how we can better work with our queer clients and the relationships. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're really looking forward to this conversation. But before we jump in, I'd like to ask you the question we ask all of our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Big question. So yeah, I'm a gay man, a cis gay man, a white cis gay man. And I have, since the beginning of my professional career, worked with queer couples and queer relationships. I started in San Francisco about 12 years ago. And since then, it really became clear to me that their queer relationships are different. And so I'm kind of on a mission to help therapists work better with queer clients and queer relationships, and also provide more resources for queer clients out there in lots of different ways.
So one of the questions that we ask at the top of a lot of our episodes isn't from a shaming place. It's a place from if people are already making these mistakes, we can take some of the collective wisdom of our field. But when therapists are working with queer folks in their relationships, what is it that a lot of therapists tend to get wrong?
So I'm also a sex therapist, and one of the things I hear most often when queer couples will come in or queer relational clients will come in and see me is that they loved their last therapist, but their therapist was really uncomfortable talking about queer sex. And especially if they were seeing a couples therapist or a relational therapist, that can be a real problem, right? And so if sex, I think, is just something in general that we as therapists don't get a lot of training or experience in, and then you add the layer of queer sex on top of it, and it can be pretty uncomfortable for some therapists out there to really talk about this topic and bring it in and invite it in. And many of our clients have the same experiences. So they will not necessarily bring up the topic of sex, on their first, second, third, fourth session. So I think if therapists can just get a little bit more comfortable asking questions, and I've never had a client come in and say, a therapist asked me a question and that's why I left, right? So often we just avoid asking the questions that we're uncomfortable around. So that would be my big PSA here is ask the questions.
So for people that are maybe not as experienced working with this, I don't want to subject some random couples out there to some really naive questions, and I want to maybe encourage them to go to consultation, but to get through some maybe introductory or awkward questions at first. Specifically, what kind of questions are you encouraging clinicians to be able to ask these couples?
Yeah, so questions like, what kind of sex are you having? Or how is pleasure fitting into your sex life currently? Are there things that you wish were different in your sex life? Are there things you really love in your sex life? I really try to center queer joy as much as, there's so much literature and research out there about all of the issues that present themselves for the queer community. But I think the more often that we as therapists can also look for the things that are going well, I think that's a real opportunity there for, I think, connection with the therapist, but also an opportunity to build on the strengths of the client. So starting from a strengths-based place with sex, I think, can be a real good way to dip your toes in.
The questions you're asking, it seems like those would be questions that you would want to ask any couple. And that would be something that I'm assuming is part of sex therapy training, is making sure that sex becomes part of the conversation. How well does the current sex therapy certifications teach about queer sex, queer relationships, those types of things?
So it really depends. I just completed my sex therapy training with the Sexual Health Alliance, and they have some great opportunities there where they bring in guest lecturers who specialize in queer sex and different kinds of sex of all kinds. But unfortunately, I'm still the person in the back asking, like, is there research on this with queer folks? And it's not something, when I've gone to a bunch of sex therapy conferences, queer sex is often like just the asterisks at the end. This will also work for queer folks. And it's like, has there been research on this? Are people actually exploring this? And is there any evidence that this actually will work? And are you just tagging this on because, these questions can be good for queer folks too? Or are there some people actually out there doing research on this population? And there is some, but the funding, I think we're seeing this just kind of across the board. Like if people can't make money off of it, there's not always the funding there. And so I do think queer folks are still getting left behind in some important ways.
What are the differences that you're identifying or what were the differences that you did identify it when you were going through your training between straight sex and queer sex?
Well, if all of the case examples are just heterosexual couples or cisgender couples, then it really makes it very difficult to just apply some of those same concepts. Yes, of course, there are some universal things around sex and sexuality that we can pull into our queer clients. But if you're not talking directly about, different experiences, different bodies, different types of pleasure, then you're really doing a disservice. And so I think that's something that I noticed a lot, was that there's still a way in which queer sex is sort of this, add-on at the end. It's not necessarily integrated into a lot of people's presentations.
Do you have any favorite researchers or people who are putting out good information? Are you that researcher? Are you somebody you're obviously on the podcast, but who are you excited about who's talking in this space, and what are you learning from them?
Yeah, I mean, there are some really great people out there. So Justin Lehmiller at the Kinsey Institute, he has a great podcast, and he does. I just saw him at the Shaw conference, and he was presenting on dating in 2025. And he had a bunch of slides that were specific to what are happening for queer folks. And, so there's people like that out there. There's definitely also writers like Gender Magic, Ray McDaniel. That's a great book for trans folks right now. Lucy Fielding, Transsex, a great book out there. Like there are some really great resources out there. We just need more of them.
Quick question for therapists listening. Do you use Gmail or Outlook for client communication? Here's something most therapists don't realize. Even with a business or workspace account, Gmail and Outlook aren't fully HIPAA compliant. That gap is on you to fix. That's where Powbox comes in. Powbox automatically encrypts every email you send, and your clients read it right at their inbox. No portals, no passwords, no extra steps. It works with the Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 account you already have, so nothing about your day-to-day changes.
Setup takes minutes. There's no training required, and Powbox's US-based support team is there if you need them. Listeners of Modern Therapist Survival Guide get $250 off an annual plan. Visit powbox.com, that's Paubox, and use promo code MODERN.
We also know that you've got a book, and we're going to talk about that later in the episode. So you are totally one of the writers who's out there as well. But I want to talk about the 7 stages of queer relationship development, and this being how we ended up connecting for this podcast. And as an introduction for many of us, including those of us hosting this podcast. Uh, can you talk to us about those 7 stages?
Sure, yeah. I would love to. So this is based on the research of my mentors, Dr. Alan Bader and Peter Pearson, who developed the developmental model of couples therapy. And I've been training with them for a number of years, and they are so open to kind of expanding their work and research to other populations. And so I went up to them and I said, I really want to write this book, and there's 2 additional stages I wanted to add to your model, because there are 2 stages that are unique, I think, to queer relationships. And so I took their 5-stage model and I added 2 additional stages. And would it be helpful if I went through those 7 stages? Or how would
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, please.
Great. So the first stage is one that I added, the second queer adolescence. And so for a lot of us in the queer community, we went through our adolescence physically at the same time as our non-queer counterparts. But many of us we didn't have opportunities to explore parts of ourselves, parts of our gender or our sexuality for lots of different reasons. Either we weren't out, or we didn't have a safe community or safe friendships. And so we maybe explored some parts of ourselves, but not fully. And so after somebody comes out or transitions, oftentimes they have this second queer adolescence where they're getting to know themselves and they're learning what's important to them, what makes them tick. And that is a really good beginning stage for differentiation. And so the developmental model is really all based on relational differentiation. And you can't really differentiate. And by differentiation, I mean being able to connect to what's important to you, your thoughts, feelings, wishes, and desires, when they're in tension with a partner who may have different thoughts, feelings, wishes, and desires. And until you know yourself, you can't really differentiate. You can't really connect with what's most important to you. And so that's the first stage that I added to their model. Then we go into the honeymoon stage. This is right out of Ellen and Pete's research. So the honeymoon stage is the first 6 months or 2 years of a relationship where you are bonding and you're connecting and attaching and all that, all those beautiful hormones are flowing, and you're learning all the ways that you're similar and making sure that this is a relationship you want to continue. After that, usually after 6 months to 2 years, you move into the discovering differences stage. This is where differentiation really hits the road, or the rubber meets the road. And so this is when couples will start to realize, okay, we have all these similarities, but there are some really important ways that we're different. And how do we bring back that individuality while also maintaining the connection that we've developed? So it's like a balance between connection and autonomy. And then the third stage is after you've discovered those differences, you've got to go out in the world and explore them. And so one that I see all the time in the gay men that I work with is open relationships. So they discover they want to be in an open relationship, and then they go out and they explore that, and they come out and figure out some different ways that they want to, incorporate that into their lives and their relationships. Another way that shows up, because that topic can be a third rail for some folks, is, they discover that they have been letting some of their long distance friendships linger on the vine. And so they want to reconnect with that. They want to have a trip with the boys or the girls or whatever, and not include their partner. And that can be, a way that they go out into the world and explore that. After you go out into the world and explore, this is the other stage that I added, the agreement stage. I think this is important for most relationships. After you go out and you explore and you shift something, it's really important to have very clear agreements. So many of the fights that we see in our office, right, are about unspoken agreements. And so getting really clear about what those agreements are and revisiting that is, I think, a really important part of the process. After that, we come to the reconnection stage. And so this is really important, because with differentiation, there's the connection and there's the autonomy. When you go out and you re-nurture that autonomy, you've got to be able to come back and connect to your partner or partners, because without that, then it can feel like, okay, we're growing apart. And then the final stage that you're working towards is mutual interdependence. And this is something that I think, giving folks a North Star that they can work towards in this model is really, how can you be an individual fully, but also stay connected and flow seamlessly through these different stages, and learn that depending on somebody is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but how can you do it in an interdependent way? And so that's the 7 stages in a nutshell.
Just the last stage that you were talking about, it sounds important for all relationships, and I think it's very hard to get to. the mutual interdependence. And I think that a lot of folks who have had, whether it's trauma or unhealthy relationships that they grew up in, there's difficulty being able to distinguish between interdependence, dependence, codependence, independence. Do you have a way that you talk about it? Because I feel like that is something I'm talking about all the time.
Yes. Yeah, codependence, I think dependence in general can get sort of a bad rap, right? But in some ways, we have to be able to, I think, in a relational context, be able to rely on other people. And so the book that I wrote and the population I work mostly with is gay men. And so when you have people who are raised and socialized male in our culture, it can be very difficult to actually depend or interdepend on somebody because it's rugged independence, right? You've got to be able to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. However, I think that there are, if we were to make a continuum between codependence and interdependence on the other side, there are behaviors in codependence that make most people lose connection to themselves. They lose connection to what's important to them, and they have to do that in order to maintain a relationship. Interdependence, that's not really a part of the mix there. Interdependence, you're able to say, "Hey, honey, I've had a really long day at work. Can you walk the dog today?" Or, "Hey, I'm struggling a little bit with X, Y, or Z thing. Can I lean on you?" It's not, can I disappear into you? And I think that's a really important distinction.
I'm really always glad when we have guests on who validate things that I've been telling my clients all along. I think in my own way, I'm really specifically talking about the second queer adolescence that you're talking about, because for a lot of the young people that I've worked with who have found the opportunities and the safety to explore some of their sexuality once they move out of their household, they go on to college, they get kind of that opportunity to, as one of my clients put it at one point, actually be allowed to be queer and date and be awkward for the first time and make a lot of early relationship mistakes. Is there wisdom from this community that you have attempted or seen attempted to kind of show for people who aren't able to kind of make that step yet and be able to kind of help move along that timeline a little bit?
There's a couple of things that I repeat often. Like the first one is the queer culture is not a monolith. So I can't speak for the entire queer community. I can speak for like one slice of it. But even in the gay male community, I can't speak for all gay men. And the second thing that connects to what you're saying is that there's no right or wrong way to be queer. And so whatever your journey is and your process is, you don't have to come out. You don't have to transition or do anything that doesn't feel authentic to you. And so I think that would be kind of the resounding advice, if you want to use that word, that I would say is like there are people like you out there who are going through a similar experience. And if you can't find them in your community for whatever reason, thankfully we have the internet right now. And the internet's, can be a problem in a lot of ways, but I think it's also been really beneficial for many members of the queer community because you're able to connect to more people who look and think and are like you across the world.
You're kind of picking up on, you're laying out this theme that is, no queer relationships are the same, any part of the community. And, maybe this might be one of the limits of research, is that research likes when we can just compartmentalize everything into a box. And this kind of stuff makes us think. And that's hard to do on a day-to-day basis for a lot of people who would rather just be like, hey, everything fits into a box. With some of the people who might be listening for how queer relationships might be different, what are some of the other considerations that people who are trained under the more heteronormative schedules, what are some of the things that they should also consider?
Yeah, if we think about the relationship escalator, and this is a term that's thrown around a lot, but the way I'm using it is the relationship escalator. Once you get on it, you date, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and you move to the suburbs, and you buy the house with the white picket fence, and get 2 dogs and a cat, and all that kind of stuff.
And a minivan.
That is, and a minivan. Yes, my sister just got a minivan, and she could not be happier, and that would be my nightmare. So,
Sure.
it's different. Different people want different things. But in terms of that escalator, it is drilled into us from the time before we can even speak, right? It's in kids' books, it's in children's television, it's in movies, it's in pop culture, it's in what we see in the relationships mirrored around us. And so queer relationships, unlike other minority groups, we often don't grow up in queer families, right? We don't grow up in queer families or even have queer relatives, many of us. And so there's lots of different components that impact being queer that don't also impact heterosexual relationships in the same way. And so if we look at the media and how the media represents relationships and identities, I think there are some, thankfully there are some shows that are starting to get it right for some people. And so there is hope there. But when I was growing up, there was certainly you were the clown if you were a gay character on TV, or you were dying of AIDS. Those were the examples that I saw. And so if we can look at media representation, we can look at systemic oppression and how minority stress impacts people's identity formation and the way that they connect with other people, and the higher levels of mental health distress that we see. If you look at the Trevor Project, which does great research on young queer folks, every 2 years or so they come out with a new survey. Unfortunately, we're seeing the negative statistics, especially over the last couple of years, are just increasing. And so it's still very, very difficult to be queer. And I think sometimes when I talk to therapists who don't identify as queer, they're like, oh my gosh, it's getting so much better. Gay marriage, and I have this gay friend, and like life is better. And while that is true for some people, I'm still getting that 24-year-old in my office who's kicked out of their home, from growing up in the conservative family in the South, and has to deal with all of the same stuff in different ways that somebody would have 20 years ago. And so I think there is this belief that we want to have as therapists that things are getting easier, and they are in some really important ways, but we haven't seen yet the mental health statistics catch up with those big gains that we're seeing socially and politically in a lot of ways. And so all of that, of course, impacts the way that you attach to another human being and the way that you are able to show up in relationship. And differentiation, I think, can be even harder for some queer folks because we've learned to hide and compartmentalize and put things aside and disconnect from what really brings us vitality and pleasure and that we're longing for. So, that's a kind of a long-winded way to answer. Like, I think there's many different components, and I could go on and on and on about this, but it's something that differences are not always a bad thing. And I think if you're working with a queer client, really getting to know who they are and what makes them tick and what is difficult for them about being in a relationship with someone else is really important.
Being a fellow therapist, I know the work doesn't end when the session does. The notes, the scheduling, the billing, the insurance follow-ups, all of that admin can quietly take over your nights and weekends.
And we've both seen how the right systems can really change what private practice feels like. When we're talking with therapists who are overwhelmed, one of the biggest pain points is trying to hold too many disconnected pieces together.
That's why we want to share Simple Practice. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high trust certified, and built specifically for therapists.
Simple Practice is designed for the real-life complexity of private practice, helping with everyday admin that can pile up between sessions.
My favorite part? The all-in-one integration. Notes, billing, telehealth scheduling, and client communications are all connected in one spot, so I'm not bouncing around between separate systems.
And their AI scribe note taker can help make documentation more thorough and much faster, so you can spend less time catching up on notes and more time focused on your clients and your life outside of work.
Plus, if you're starting out or growing your practice, Simple Practice also offers credentialing support, which can take a big headache out of insurance enrollment.
If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice.
Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months.
Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
With the current political landscape and some of the fears and or actual rolling back of rights and I don't even know what the right word is, benefits the rolling back of humanity, I'm just going to stop there because I could get too depressed really quickly. How are you seeing that show up within the clients you see in the relationships that you're supporting? Because it feels like there's both what you described, that recognition, there's visibility, but certainly not all the visibility is good. And the threat, it feels like, is that things will go back to the way it was 20, 30 years ago. And there's this element of relationships being under attack or identities being under attack. So, how are you seeing that play out? What are the things that you would recommend that therapists might do to support their clients who are in this position during this particular moment in history?
Yeah, it is a heavy question. And I think, again, as a cis white gay man, I have certain privilege in this space. Like, it certainly is impacting our BIPOC clients and our trans and non-binary clients, I think, in an even more impactful way. I support a lot of different queer therapists. And so some of the things I'm hearing are like, trans folks are really, really worried about their hormone supply and like what's going to happen if that gets taken away. And that's a lifeline for a lot of people. That is, period, end of sentence. A lot of people are worried about, I'm hearing so many people thinking about, how can I get citizenship in another country? Do we have our papers in place? What's going to happen to our family if, our children, what's going to happen to our children if things get worse? And, marriage equality, is that going to go away? And what does that mean? And are we going to actually be safe? So there's so much fear right now. And I think many of us who are in the community are certainly, I think, aware of that and checking in with our clients around that. But if you're not checking in about this with your queer clients, I think you're missing some real potential here. I don't mean you have to bring it in and make the whole session about this, but how are you doing with the current world? I think is a really great place to start, because a lot of people are struggling a lot. The stress that I'm seeing because I run a couple of queer therapist consult groups, the person of the therapist stuff is coming up a lot right now, because we're living through a very difficult time while we're also trying to help support our clients through a really, very, very difficult time right now.
For the person of the therapist stuff, for the queer therapists who are our listeners, our friends, our us, whatever it is, I think those things are also important. Do you have some different pieces of advice for queer therapists going through this time?
I just think it's really important to have support. I can't, to be in a space where it's okay to cry when we get some really terrible political news, and to have people that you can open up to. And, this is a very lonely profession for a lot of us, especially if you're in private practice or you're not in a group practice or something. And so making sure you're getting your own support. I'm not going to say like self-care, like, of course we can all do more self-care, right?
Yeah.
But like, this is really, really a very, very scary time. And so, just making sure you're not alone in that, I think, is really important.
You're talking about a lot of really high level aspects in the ways that this is affecting queer people as far as citizenship and moving out. How are you seeing themes emerge and how this is playing out in people's relationships, the ways that they approach dating in this client, as well as more of the day-to-day aspects as well?
Certainly. So one of the aspects of the developmental model is neuroscience. And so if we think about Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, and the thumb being the amygdala, if your amygdala is activated, if you are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, it is going to be very difficult to have a conversation about wanting to increase this frequency of our sex, or wanting to think about adopting a kid or having a child. Those are really important conversations. But when your nervous system is so dysregulated because of what's happening in the current moment, but also if you have a history of trauma in different ways, it's very difficult to actually, like, a lot of time is being spent on just regulation right now, and slowing people down and helping them stay in their skin and be in their bodies, and somatic work and EMDR. And like, I'm just seeing a lot more trauma flaring up in the folks that I'm personally working with and supporting other people working with.
It seems like there's a lot of slowing down that's needed for much of the work that's happening in the current climate. How are you taking care of yourself in that space? Because I think our amygdalas are also activated.
Yeah, I'm just being really careful with how many people I see in a day and diversifying kind of the things that I'm doing so I can do some, writing or activism or, different things that fill my soul in different ways. I'm just seeing a lot of trauma right now, as probably many people are in their spaces. And so I'm having to kind of reconnect with my own, self-care practices and make sure I'm doing the things I need to do to keep my cup full. And I'm not always succeeding. I'm going to be honest about that. It's it is an experiment.
I want to be able to pivot and talk about your process for writing the book. And you talked a little bit about needing to add some of the stages for the relationship developmental model. Why now? Why? What was your thought process going into it? How was the process of writing the book for you?
Yeah, so I was so tired of like recommending parts of books to clients. Like here's like a really great chapter to read, but like I'm really sorry it's very heteronormative. Or like I'm sorry there's no cases of gay couples in this book, but like it's really important and the science I think will really resonate with you. And so I wanted to create a book specifically for gay male clients that really could take them from, you know, beginning to end around relationship development. And they're really, there are some books out there, but some of them are a little bit older. And so I wanted to kind of refresh some of the science and some of the different relationship structures that people are currently living with and all that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to create a book that could start with the first part of the book is it starts with you. You've got to really get clear on your relationship with differentiation and yourself. And then the second part goes into how, a go-to guide of how you could actually be in relationship and bring this therapist-y word of differentiation practically into your life. And not everybody is going to go to couples therapy or relational therapy. And I think it's really important that there are resources out there that are written for us by us and that I could happily hand to somebody without any disclaimers. And so that was the why behind it for me. And then it was a really great process to write the book. A colleague and friend of mine, Martha Kauppi, when I was trying to get this book going, was like, "Why don't you just take a month off clinical work and see if you can get a first draft or the beginnings of a first draft done?" And it was the best piece of advice I ever got. And so I took that month off. It was really risky and scary, to tell my clients about this and the financial, implications, of course. But taking that month off to really like get my thoughts on paper is I would not have been able to write this book without that because I could get everything out and then I could go back in small chunks of time and edit it and keep writing it. But for me, like writing 10 pages a day or 10 pages a week or something, it wasn't working. So that was my process.
I'm gonna get therapist-y here for a second. It seems like there's this need for many of us to be present for our clients, to keep working, doing the work, especially during this time. And so taking that month to do something for your clients, for the world, but it also meant that you needed to prioritize your own needs during that time. And so I just wanted to honor that because that is not easy to do for many of us. Many of us will, shove more clients into spaces because there's such a need. And so I just wanted to praise you for that because I think it's not easy for many of us to do that.
Thank you. I will take it.
So back to the book, who is it for? Because it sounds like it's pretty much geared towards gay men. Is it something that can translate to broadly more queer relationships, or is this really a book for gay men?
I wrote it specifically for gay men. That being said, there are many trans men out there who identify as gay men. There are, some bi men or queer men. I mean, I really talk a lot about masculinity in the book, and I wanted to stay in my lane. And so there will someday hopefully be somebody who takes the concepts of the developmental model and expands it to different parts of the queer community. I just felt like that I wasn't the person to do that. And so I wanted to stay in my lane and write from my experience. That being said, I've had lots of therapist colleagues read it who get something out of it, and there are many, many concepts in there that would be applicable to queer folks in general. I just wanted to kind of stay really niched down into who I was speaking to.
Now that you've written the book and you're getting it out there, is there thoughts tingling as far as, ooh, here's where I need to go next?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things. If I get the privilege of doing a second edition, I would like to. I have some ideas of things I would like to shift already in the book that currently exists. Then the next steps, I'm really enjoying talking more about sex and sexuality with queer folks, because I think it's something that there are definitely some people out there doing it. I still think it's, sometimes in sex therapy conferences, people will say, I've been giving the same talk for like 10, 15 years because it feels like nothing is changing. We still need to hear the same messages. And so I think culturally, there's still a lot of opportunity around sex and sexuality to make it more specific for queer folks, to hopefully get people talking about it a lot more. I think, especially in the gay male community, and this is true of myself too, I could have a lot of sex, but I couldn't always talk about it. And I think if we can bring the communication into the sex, that we're having, I think it's going to only be more beneficial for all of us.
I realize that we've been talking about your book the entire second half of this episode here, and we haven't actually named it. So what is the name of your book? And we'll give this as the opportunity to kind of tell people where you can go and find it as well.
Sure, yes. The book is called The Go-To Relationship Guide for Gay Men, From Honeymoon to Lasting Commitment. And you can find it on Amazon, through the publisher, Jessica Kingsley Publishing, anywhere you basically buy a book, Kindle. There's not an audiobook yet, though I hope at some point we get one.
Is there anything else that you're feeling like we need to ask to kind of drive things home, something that we kind of gloss over? This is also an opportunity just for, is there something that Katie and I, as very cis straight therapists, are missing as part of this conversation?
No, I think you're asking really great questions. And I love, what I love most is openness. Most therapists that I talk to, they're scared they're going to hurt their clients. They're not intentionally trying to not connect with their queer clients. I think people, we don't want to hurt anybody. We're therapists. We love the people that we work with. And so, I think it's you don't know what you don't know. And I think the more that we can have, we're not in the post gay rights era yet. There's still a lot more work to be done. There's still a lot more education to be done. If you are working with a queer client, I think it's really important to get some consultation or do some training or read a book, listen to a podcast, right? Like, are you doing that kind of work on the back end and not just expecting your clients to educate you? I think it's a really important thing for folks to think about.
So in addition to your book, where can people find out more about you and your practice?
Yeah, so my website is queerrelationshipinstitute.com. On there, I do a 9-month training program for queer therapists who want to learn the developmental model from a queer perspective, which I love doing. This is my third year doing that. And then I have some consultation groups for queer therapists also who want to do more work with the developmental model. And I'm on Instagram, Queer Relationship Institute, and YouTube, Queer Relationship Institute. So all those places.
And we will include links to all of Tom's stuff in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. And the magic elves that work behind the scenes will also look up the references that Tom had mentioned earlier and include those in our show notes as well. Katie is laughing because
me a magic elf?
I am calling Katie a magic elf. Katie will put those in the show notes over at MTSG Podcast as well. And follow us on our social media. Join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group. We're also now on Substack. And until next time, I'm Curt Wilhelm with Katie Vernoy and Tom Bruett.
Thanks again to Powbox for sponsoring today's episode.
Powbox helps therapists send and receive email that's secure, HIPAA compliant, and easy for clients to open. Get $250 off at powbox.com with promo code MODERN.
Private practice has enough built-in complexity. Simple Practice brings notes, billing, scheduling, telehealth, insurance, and client communication into one place. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.